light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Life is about the growth of the soul, and the point for this moment is that my growth began within the Roman Catholic Church, and when I think of the Roman Catholic Church, what comes to my mind is the vaulted worship spaces, these high ceilings, the candles and the incense and the vestments and the thundering pipe organs and stained glass windows and all the theater or the spectacle of the place. And there was something about all of that together that just seemed to convey reverence and awe. And I grew up with the feeling that no one ever had to tell you to whisper when you walked into a Catholic church, because there was something about the architecture and design of the space that just told you there was something transcendent about this place, that it was in some sense it was a sacred space. I didn't have much use for the administration of the church, so I really didn't pay much attention to the priests or the pope or all the different doctrines the church said. Yeah, whatever. I was concerned about being there and experiencing God, experiencing reverence and awe and worship and worshipful music. And it was all very theatrical and very symbolism was everywhere, symbolism and metaphor. And so I suppose that might help to explain at least some of how my life evolved artistically and creatively. From the Catholic Church, I went to a Nazarene church, then to an Assemblies of God church, then to a non-denominational church, then there was the Catholic Charismatic Renewal for a while. There was a Presbyterian church when I lived in New York City. There were various Southern Baptist churches when I lived in the Kansas City area for a short time. There were Reformed churches of various descriptions when I was in college. An Episcopal church when I was one of the various churches when I moved to Colorado. Then I met people who described themselves as pagans or neo-pagans, people whose spirituality oriented around nature. And I began to meet more people who described themselves as some form of Buddhist, or using some elements of Buddhist practice. Some people who described themselves as utilizing practices that were inspired by, I suppose might be the way to say it, inspired by practices of Native American spirituality, which Native American spirituality authentically is a very complex interweaving of life and spirituality that I couldn't begin to describe within the little half hour of this show. But seeing all these different bits and pieces, and somehow from the very beginning I always had this understanding that God was bigger than all of that, that these were people making the best guess or the best description they could about what they were experiencing as they prayed and worshipped and read some books that were regarded as sacred texts, some books that were regarded as someone else's reflections inspired by sacred text, stories of each other's experiences in spiritual or religious contexts, all sorts of different things like that. And it was a lot of diverse things to integrate. But somehow behind it all, I had this, from the beginning, I had this understanding that God was bigger than all that, and God pre-existed all human theology and humanity itself. And as such, I think when we change the words about God, it doesn't change God, it only changes our relationship with God and the way we interact with God. But that which is God has been there longer than we've been here. And it is what it is and that which is God, remarkably, in my understanding, seeks a relationship of love with humanity, understanding that humanity will never be able to fully comprehend all of who and what God is, and yet we have this relationship of love and hopefully of ever evolving, ever expanding wisdom. I suppose, every metaphor has a point at which it breaks down. It has limitations, but I suppose in some ways it's a little like the relationship I have with my dogs, that I take care of them, I feed them, I shelter them, I make sure they get enough exercise, I attend to their needs as well as I can. But they and I don't have a particularly developed language. It's not like we can talk about political situations or the weather forecast or what did or didn't happen in a particular project I was working on. Those sorts of conversations about ideas I really can't have with my dogs. We don't have that kind of language. But we still love each other. When I come home, they are so thrilled and happy to see me, jumping up and down and wanting to lick my face and just show their affection somehow. And for my part, I love them very much, and if anything were to happen to any one of them, I would just be emotionally devastated. We love each other, even without a language, even without full comprehension. There are so many times when my sheepdog looks at me and he sits there staring at me, and I know he must be thinking something, but I can't imagine what it is. It's as if he's waiting for some sort of response from me, but I'm not sure what response I'm supposed to give. And in a similar sort of way, there are times when I want them to understand what I'm asking of them, and I use all the best language I can, and I can't always get my point across very well. All that being said, there are a good number of commands and words that I can say that do evoke predictable responses. So we have this relationship, and we do the best we can, and it's enough that we can have a relationship of love with each other. But it's always evolving, always growing and developing, and of course shaped by every incident and experience that comes along between us. Like the moon, which is visible from every place on the earth, God is not easy to hide. In a sense, God is invisible and hidden within all things, and yet kind of everywhere, so that somebody on one side of the earth may have an experience of God and put words to it, and somebody on the other side who speaks a totally different language and looks at life through a totally different cultural lens may have an experience of God and put different words to it, and they don't have to argue about who's right, because I think God is able to meet each person wherever that person is, in their understanding, in their language, in their development. I have some of the dogs I've had over the years understood certain commands, while other dogs that I've had over the years didn't. And so I could say one thing to this dog, but if I said the same thing to the other dog would look at me like, "What? I don't know what you want of me." So I had to direct certain commands to certain dogs because they would understand, but this one wouldn't. And so I've been told by parents also that no matter how many children you have in a family, every child is always different. And you can't raise any two children exactly the same way, because the ways that we see and hear and experience and respond are all completely unique. And so each time a parent has another child, it's another relearning process, because everything they did with the previous child won't necessarily work with the new child. A lot of things may have to be adapted or modified in some way. In any case, so for myself, having experienced this broad spectrum of spiritual perspectives and experiences, and in each case putting myself into it completely and learning a lot from each one, and yet finding that each one was a piece of a larger puzzle. I eventually wound up describing myself as an eclectic mystic. eclectic meaning that I take bits and pieces from all over, and a mystic meaning that group of people within human history and spiritual experience that seem to gravitate more to the essence of God than the form, and more to the questions than to the answers. And yet, even with all that divine mystery all over the place, to still have this empowering, inspiring, vibrant, day-to-day relationship with the divine. In the same way that if my dogs had it their way, I'm sure I would do nothing but play with the dogs every day, 8 hours a day at least. And we would go on walks incessantly, but unfortunately, of course, there's a lot of other things that have to be done, so we can't quite go to that extreme. But, it's bits and pieces in this complex living of life, that a few minutes here and a few minutes there, but I want, in whatever few minutes I can squeeze in, 20 times a day, I want my dogs to know that they're loved, and that I value them, that I'm very glad they're here, that they are part of my family. So that's one of the ways I bring that awareness. But coming back to spirituality and how there's all these different perspectives and religions and spiritualities, and sometimes it has to be individually adapted, because the one-size-fits-all answer that whichever religion or church presented, it helps in a lot of ways, but there's some things it might not answer. And so sometimes alternative methods need to be found by the individual to meet a need that is basic, that is completely legitimate and respectable, but perhaps difficult to communicate. Perhaps, since I keep using the metaphor of my dogs, a light example of that would be when their water dish goes dry. And I jokingly say that, that the water dish is dry and they know it and they're trying to communicate it and they just can't seem to get it through to me because I'm not paying attention or something. And so sometimes they'll wind up actually dragging it out of the kitchen all the way into the dining room. And so I'll come walking out of my office and the dog water dish is sitting in the dining room, where of course it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be in the corner of the kitchen. But by doing that, they make it absolutely clear what the need is. And it's like, oh, of course. And then I refill the water dish. In a similar sort of way, religion and spirituality present these general sorts of insights and empowerments and methods. And sometimes when it just isn't quite working, we have to take the initiative and do something different and unique to try to get the need met in some other way. And in general, I don't know that there's, depending on exactly what method we come up with, I mean, there's nothing particularly damaging or wrong for me about my dogs dragging the water dish into the dining room. It certainly does finally get the message across, though. There may be things that people do in relating to God that, if nobody's being hurt by it and if it gets the need met, I suppose one method may be as good as another. And if it's not, well, let's talk about it and figure out why it's not, or in what ways it's not. In all of this integration going on, though, and in the dialogue and the discussion about what works and what doesn't, and why does it work, and why doesn't it work, and what does it need that it's not getting, I find there's a lot of, the old saying is that two heads are better than one. The idea being that if you get two different people with two different perspectives and get them talking, that the combination of their wisdom and insights and experiences and recommendations may produce a better answer than either one of them could produce all on their own. And so in looking at spirituality and religion, I keep saying, let everyone pick the one that works for them, that genuinely works for them. And then let's have a dialogue so that the wisdom of one can benefit all the rest. and vice versa. And so a number of years ago, I tried putting together or I did put together I think what I called an interfaith holiday special, because often in December there will be bumper stickers and signs that show up that say things like Jesus is the reason for the season. And of course, those who are familiar with church history know that most people agree Jesus wasn't born in December anyway, but that the shift to December came when the Roman Catholic Church was trying to Christianize the various pagan holidays in Europe that they were encountering as they spread out and took over more territory and conquered various pagan tribes and so forth. And that's a whole nother history lesson we don't have time to go into right now. But the point being, as I contemplated, so if Jesus is not the reason for the season, what is the real reason for the season? And what finally became clear to me is that it has to do with the basic scientific, if you will. Science is just another perspective really for evaluating things. The basic astronomical fact, a fact of astronomy, that in late December is when the winter solstice occurs. That day that is the shortest day and the longest night. And thereafter, the days start getting longer and the nights start getting shorter again. And it is specifically the reversal of the days getting shorter and the nights getting longer to the days getting longer and the nights getting shorter that told humanity in past times that the world wasn't coming to an end, that life would return, that there would be a spring, that it wasn't like the days would keep getting shorter until there was no more day, and we lived in a night where everything was cold and everything was dark and we would all die. So having the days start getting longer was a way of saying life has triumphed, life will continue. The coldest day of winter is not the end of everything. And so because that was such a major turning point for everyone, simply by living by virtue of the fact of living on planet Earth, simply because of being here, the winter solstice is a major, major shift. And it's not the winter solstice because somebody put it on the calendar. It's the winter solstice because the entire planetary alignment shifts and the days start getting longer. And so in trying to put that into a song, I said, you know what it comes down to? As I looked at all the different religious and spiritual systems I've ever encountered, I find that the two things they all have in common is that they're all oriented around pursuits of love and wisdom. And they have different definitions of what they consider to be love and wisdom, but they're all pursuing love and wisdom. And so coupling that with the importance of the winter solstice as the real reason why there are so many holidays in so many different religions, all happening in late December, because everyone north of the equator, in any case, for them, the winter solstice is in late December. South of the equator, of course, if you happen to live in Australia, a winter solstice would be what is the summer solstice in the north. But I guess in both cases it's called the winter solstice. It's just not at the same time, of course. But there are so many holidays there because everyone seemed to recognize how important it was that the days start getting longer. And so every belief system I've heard of has created some sort of December holiday. Something, and many of them do have specific focuses on the return of light in some sense of the word. A metaphorical light, the light of insight, or a literal light, the light of the sun, or both. And the ways in which the return of light could parallel each other, that a prayer, if you will, that the return of light physically would equate to a return of light spiritually and psychologically and relationally. to give us a reminder each year to shift our focus back to putting light, putting insight, putting wisdom, putting love into all our living of life, our interactions with others, our interactions with our communities. And so in trying to focus on that universal common ground between them all, I wrote a song that simply, that recognizes light that is love, light that is peace. And so I'd like to share that with you now. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around, may it shine in you and me. I light the candle on the altar, and darkness fades away. I kneel in prayer to one above, and bless the coming day. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around, may it shine in you and me. The bonfire's flames that leap and spiral from burning wood below, the drum's heartbeat and voices chant, bring brightness to my soul. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around, may it shine in you and me. The turning world that hangs in space, and the line drawn by the sun, the warmth and health the lightness brings, as life goes on and on. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around, may it shine in you and me. The flame that will not go away, although many days go past. The joy of love and harmony that give hope strength to last. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around, may it shine in you and me. The council fire where wisdom comes from words spoken with care, prayers ascending with the smoke and commitments that we share. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around. May it shine in you and me. Around the world we all join hands, and our voices start to sing. Let there be peace, let there be love to every living thing. Light that is love, light that is peace, within and all around. May it shine in you and me. Within